Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So excited to have you here. We're just going to wait a moment while we have some of our participants today join us from the waiting room. Hello, everyone, and welcome to StrikeUP Connects, building businesses that work with your brain. I'm Heather Cannings. I am the program lead for StrikeUp and the Dahlia Women Entrepreneurship Loan Fund at Adventure. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are gathered virtually from many places across Canada. I am hosting from Cobourg, Ontario, and I want to respectfully acknowledge that I am located in the traditional treaty territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa Nations, collectively known as the William Treaties First Nations. We are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and gather on these lands. So just a few quick housekeeping notes before we actually get started today. Just to confirm, this session will be recorded. So after today's session, you will receive an email with a link to the replay, a special resource from Signal49 Research, a guide called Navigating Self-Employment for Neurodivergent Entrepreneurs. So even if you have to step away for a few moments at any point, you will still have everything that you need. If you have any questions throughout this session, please feel free to drop them into the chat and I will bring them to Dr. Fane during the Q&A, or she may address them as she is presenting. And if you're feeling a little shy, I have a few questions to get us ready at the end of the presentation. So for those of you who may be new here, StrikeUP Connects is our free webinar series that connects women entrepreneurs with experts and peers on topics that matter to building and running a business. So you can find past sessions at strikeup.ca/connects and watch the replays on demand. Today's conversation is one I've been really looking forward to. Neurodivergent women entrepreneurs are often building businesses while navigating systems, workflows, and expectations that were simply not designed with their brains in mind. Today, we're going to change that conversation. I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Jennifer Fane, Lead Research Associate at Signal49 Research, where she leads the neurodiversity research portfolio. Dr. Fane holds an interdisciplinary PhD in education, public health, and social policy from Flinders University and brings more than 2 decades of experience as a neurodivergent teacher, professor, and research in both Canada and Australia. Her work is grounded in participatory, person-centered approaches that meaningfully engage lived experience, and she is dedicated to translating evidence into real, actionable insights for neurodivergent Canadians. She is also neurodivergent herself, which brings an authenticity to this conversation that I know our community will really appreciate. Dr. Fane, thank you so much for being here. The floor is now yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Heather, and good morning to everyone, I guess, who's still in the morning, and good afternoon to those of you who've already transitioned to the afternoon. Just going to pull up my deck here and see if it's actually going to work. Perfect. I can't see the comments in my screen view, Heather, so maybe I'll just wait to the end. But please do feel as I go through. I love it when people are engaging, comments, questions. Please feel free to use the chat as a way of really engaging in the session. Hello, everyone, and I'm going to get started. Oh, I'm going to make sure my functionality is all working here. Fabulous. Just want to please do not feel the need to read this slide. This is provided by my organization. Just do want to highlight that Signal49 Research, if you've not heard of us before, it might be because we were the Conference Board of Canada up until January. We've had a recent name change. So we are a Canadian not-for-profit research-focused organization that is doing research across Canada. Perfect. I also just want to place the research I'm talking about in a suite of research happening at the conference at Signal49. Sorry, I also might say conference board and have to put money in the swear jar we have for our team. I've been at Signal49 for the past 3 years, and I've been developing a body of work around neurodivergent experiences in the workplace, in post-secondary education, and in barriers to workforce participation. So, if you are broadly more interested in research about neurodivergent experiences, there are quite a few other research studies and data points that I can pull and share if you'd like to follow up with me afterwards. Great. I'm going to give a very, very quick study overview of the national study that I led last year that really sought to investigate why neurodivergent individuals are looking. Sorry, I'm going to start that again. Neurodivergent people are underrepresented in the workplace, but we see an overrepresentation in self-employment. And that is for quite a few reasons that I'm going to get into the research study. But that was really the genesis. It was looking at why is this group of extremely talented, hardworking people being pushed from the workforce, and where are they seeking to re-engage into the workforce? And that is really the genesis. I also want to highlight that I'm very grateful for my research advisory board for this research study that was made up of neurodivergent entrepreneurs, as well as an entrepreneurship instructor as well. So I'm very thankful. As Heather mentioned, I'm also neurodivergent myself. I'm late identified autistic. I'm also dyslexic. And there's probably a few other things bubbling around in there too as well. Like many of us here on this call, I'm sure have very varied cognitive profiles. So this research study really was by the neurodivergent community for the neurodivergent community. So I'm so pleased to be sharing it with you here today. So the idea was around building around strengths. For many neurodivergent Canadians, self-employment and entrepreneurship offers a more inclusive and empowering path than traditional employment. That's because it allows individuals to leverage strengths, building businesses around skills and interests or their ways of thinking, to exercise autonomy and flexibility, designing schedules, pace, work environments that suit them best, and often to create purpose and impact. A lot of neurodivergent entrepreneurs in Canada, actually about a third of the sample, are actually working with the neurodivergent community themselves as well too. So there's lots of synergies here around neurodivergent self-employment and social change and innovation for the neurodivergent community. Really quickly, we were able to capture 78 neurodivergent self-employed individuals in this research study, as well as another 31 self-employment stakeholders. Not surprisingly, over half of the self-employment stakeholders were also neurodivergent themselves. So I'm really pleased that I'm bringing to you the voices of 120 neurodivergent humans who all are highly invested in self-employment and entrepreneurism in Canada. And then after we did that initial data collection, I took this back to a stakeholder engagement forum of another 41 individuals, over half were neurodivergent themselves as well again, to make sure that the findings were accurate and sort of actionable. Okay, that's the boring study stuff. I want to actually get into the findings now. So as I said, neurodivergent representation in self-employment, we see an over-representation in some ways, and that is due to both self-employment being desirous and a choice, but it is also about self-employment being a response to workplaces that really do not capture, include, or value neurodivergent ways of thinking and working. So this is what the sample looked like. So this is the 75 neurodivergent entrepreneurs that were willing to share a little bit of information about their identity and diagnosis. And this sample is actually mapping with other samples across other research studies around neurodivergent identity. So on the left-hand graph, on the very far left-hand side, you'll see that most participants actually had multiple identities or diagnoses. Almost half of the sample we're not talking to just someone who perhaps is dyslexic or has autism or is autistic or has ADHD. For about almost half this sample, and I see this trend in other samples, we see a high level of co-occurrence. So we see highly varied cognitive profiles. Of course, I do again, and the second highest growing profile in the neurodivergent identity that I'm seeing as well is ADHD, specifically in the late diagnosed population as well. And when we talk about women as a late diagnosed population, we see a large amount of late diagnosed women with multiple identities and or that ADHD label. Another interesting thing about this sample is about 30% are self-identifying. That's actually quite similar to another data set I had on post-secondary students. That's about 33%. Now, self-identification is absolutely valid. Neurodivergent people, I think, who've done a lot of work about thinking and understanding themselves, know themselves really well. We also know that there's extensive barriers to assessments, including cost, stigma, shame, internalized ableism, a lack of appropriate providers. But we also know that self-identification can sometimes cause challenges around accessing supports or resources in the workplace, which is why, again, it's not surprising to sort of see a third of that sample that probably being impacted by that. And then just in the end, it was mostly a sample of women, women and gender diverse humans. That's 11% would be gender diverse, 63% women. So I'm really excited to be able to bring the findings from predominantly women neurodivergent entrepreneurs with complex cognitive profiles to this conversation today. And I do want to highlight, because I know there's a large variety of individuals in the room. When I am talking about neurodivergent self-employment, I do want to highlight that I'm really talking about two somewhat distinct populations. And there is overlap. These two categories are not completely separate, but I do want to highlight them. Early identified individuals, so that's individuals who are identified as neurodivergent, perhaps in before elementary school, during K to 12 education. They are more often, while they might have more information about their diagnosis or identity, they are more often excluded from traditional work. That might be to a lack of presumption of competence, that might be a lack of opportunities, that might be a lack of accessible pathways. But essentially, more often, self-employment for them is an option to enter into the workforce because there are not other options. The other grouping that we see when we talk about neurodivergent self-employment are later identified individuals. Those are individuals who are more likely to have been diagnosed later, so 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. They're also much more likely to have had traditional work experience, possibly decades of traditional work experience, but then having left due to burnout, a lack of opportunities, mental health leaves, or workplaces that simply absolutely would not allow them to do their best and be places where they could work. And that's sort of that quote I have on the bottom here. I'm not sure. Heather, is my bar in the way of the quotes, or are you able to see the full slide? Just wanted to double
I
check.
can see the full slide.
Perfect, good. That here is an entrepreneur who spoke to the fact that actually self-employment was her only option after trying to receive disclosure and accommodations at work. So here we see that for a lot of later identified individuals, self-employment is a response or a necessity versus a choice or an opportunity. But that being said, regardless of how we are pushed or pulled into self-employment, neurodivergent ways of thinking can be absolutely powerful business assets and actually do funnel well into self-employment or highly self-directed work. I am not self-employed, but I do highly self-directed work because I actually am not good at things other than highly self-directed work. If I'm employed at a job and asked to work exactly the same as everyone else, I will be a problem. If I am employed in highly self-directed work where I can set what needs to happen and the ways that it's going to happen and what I want at the end, I will thrive and succeed. So this is not necessarily a workplace versus self-employment challenge, but often self-employment is the way to get that, the control over the deliverables, the vision, the ways to work, because most workplaces simply do not allow for that. But if we are thinking about what specific skills neurodivergent folk bring to the workplace, these are kind of categories of the key ones. Pattern recognition. These are your data analysts, your researchers, your individuals who are poring over lots of information and trying to make sense of it all. Deep focus, whether that's hyper focus or being able to just really zone in on an area of interest or talent. Creativity, and I think this is probably one of the biggest ones for a lot of business owners, that idea of just novel thinking, unconventional approaches, problem solving. And the last one is around systems thinking. Neurodivergent people tend to be bottom-up thinkers. We're looking for all the information, we're trying to fill in all the gaps, and we see the problems that other people don't. We see the solutions other people don't. But then we forget that in workplaces, there are hierarchies about who are allowed to make those decisions and why things happen the way they are and how you're supposed to say that and how you're supposed to do this and that. And that's why often even neurodivergent people with the very best ideas in the workplace can often be seen as the least valuable employees because of the way that the ideas are transmitted, communication preferences, and also sometimes forgetting that hierarchies, very structured, neurotypical preferring hierarchies exist that sometimes we forget and or don't simply do not want to play with. And I can't talk about, I think, the talents neurodivergent individuals bring to self-employment and highly directed work without talking a little bit about special interests and hyperfixation, because I think this is how neurodivergent people often structure their work, their careers, or their areas of interest. So for those of you that are autistic or ADHD or ADHDers as well, there's been some interesting data or research trying to pull apart some of these identities and understand them a little bit better. So for autistics, special interests often define careers, job roles, and businesses. And they last on average 13 years, which actually is beyond a career cycle these days for a lot of people. Anecdotally for myself, my last special interest started off as a competition to lose 25 pounds and get healthy, and ended in a PhD in health and well-being. So these special interests, and I'm sure someone else on the call is nodding their head around special interest and their business or their career and where they've gone. So these special interests often are seen as sometimes as if we're thinking pejoratively, sometimes they're silly, sometimes they're obsessive, sometimes people don't understand them, but also that they sometimes can be our best asset in thinking through our skills, our interests, and what participation in the workforce could look like. Now, if we think over to our ADHDers over here, it looks a little bit different. And sometimes for ADHDers, it's more about intensity versus the topic itself, that the topic might not be so central to the identity, but the need for that dopamine hit, that intensity, and moving at that pace is so important. For individuals with ADHD, it can be a really interesting mix of these two things put together, and how that shows up for you might differ. But again, these special interests, these hyperfixations, the intensity, the passion we have for the things that we do and we love is absolutely our greatest asset in a lot of ways. And for so many, that self-employment avenue was that way to actually actualize that special interest or that skill set as opposed to a workplace. And coming back to sort of idea of cognitive profiles, we just do think differently. Our brains are set up very, very differently, yet we're in a world that has taught us to try to be neurotypical. Our education was set up for neurotypicals, our workplace is set up for neurotypicals, society is set up for neurotypicals to move easily through society. And I understand why that happened. That's 80% of the population on average. So it makes sense that systems were created for what we thought was the average person. But as we know so much more about this, we see that the way these systems have developed have left these extreme gaps that really leave us neurodivergent folk struggling to try to navigate these same systems. And Doyle's work, this is Dr. Nancy Doyle's here, explains this really well. So this graph looks at the cognitive profiles of a typical neurodivergent person versus a typical neurotypical person. Now, I want to say, of course, that everyone is an individual. Cognitive diversity exists across neurotypicals and neurodivergents, but we absolutely do see a clustering of different cognitive profiles for neurodivergent folk than for neurotypical folk. So that line that goes across the middle, I know it's hard to see with the colors, but the one that's just hovering around that 100 average IQ, that's an average neurotypical brain. They are really great all-rounders. For a neurotypical, if they're good at one thing in the workplace, they're generally pretty good at the other workplace skills. You can kind of get an idea of how good they are at one thing from how good they are at the others. These are your middle managers. These are your folk who are fantastic at like keeping all the balls in the air, doing a good job, understanding the hidden curriculum, the social fabric of workplaces. It's set up for them. They're thriving. Now let's compare this to that neurodivergent profile where you can see we have like big peaks and troughs. So those peaks are our talents and our skills that go above and beyond neurotypical individuals. We have these peaks that most neurotypicals do not. However, these peaks are paired with functional challenges, co-current challenges. Sometimes they're called deficits or just things you're bad at, or they might be things that you have felt that you were just terrible at your whole life because you're a bad person who didn't try hard enough, when actually it's a hardwired brain difference. So this is the challenge in workplaces, is that if workplaces think everyone is in the middle all around, what happens to neurodivergent people is there only are deficits, our challenges are seen. So for me, I'm dyslexic, but I read and write about 3 to 5 times faster than most people that I know. But I spell at a grade 5 level. It's really atrocious. I spell the word accommodation wrong every single time I write it, even though I actually write this word 3 times a day. I'm not even joking you. It's like mapped into my brain incorrectly. So what would happen to me in the workplace is I would write and I would create and do these things, and then I would, of course, proofread it or edit it because you're supposed to, because that's what workplace looks like. And I would submit it to my boss or my teacher or my professor. And what is the comment I get? This is sloppy. This is not proofread. This is not edited. This is lazy work. You need to do harder. Don't give this to me until it's ready. And then I would spend a lot of time thinking I was just a really lazy person who couldn't seem to do the thing that everyone else was doing. Now, when I think about my cognitive profile, it makes perfect sense. I absolutely cannot proofread or edit at a typical neurotypical person. Now, technology exists. I'm going to talk a little bit more on technology. So it's actually, I'm able to get around it quite easily. But without that, you could see that I would be very easily positioned as a problem in terms of reading and writing in the workplace. But absolutely, these are my standout talents. And this is what happens. We are called out on what we're not good at, but we're not given the chance to show what we are good at in workplaces because we're often stuck in those entry level positions because we're not the all-rounder to move up and move through those management levels. So this is why self-employment really helps neurodivergent people get around this cognitive profile and workplace challenge because it allows you to work in your areas of strength while putting in your own individual strategies around challenges. And another way to think about it is just, I like this other representation. This is another way of looking at that spiky profile. So the orange is the spiky, it's the neurodivergent, and the black is the typical. But you can see here just about mapping that cognitive profile around motor skills, memory skills, social, neurotypical social skills, because that's what workplaces measure, right? Your ability to essentially engage as a neurotypical. So that is very challenging for neurodivergent people because they're actually asked to show up to work not as themselves. And the only way to do that would essentially be to mask, which will end in sort of burnout and challenge, or to be oneself and then generally often be misunderstood in the workplace. And spiky skills are highly contextual. So what your skill profile in a workplace, a traditional workplace, will look different than perhaps your own home office, than a shopping mall or your child's baseball game or a family event. So how you would react or interact with your environment and what is happening absolutely will change dependent on that environment, which is why, again, neurodivergent people generally do better when they can have more control over their environment to adapt it or themselves to the environment more effectively. Okay, perfect. Let's actually get into, now that we know all those things, let's actually get into those experiences of self-employment. So, as I mentioned before, there is the beautiful diversity and complexity in neurodivergent self-employment. I was actually blown away by the diversity of the self-employment pool of neurodivergent workers in Canada. But despite that, they are still facing a lot of systemic misunderstandings about their strengths or needs, and whether that is when doing some part-time work with an employer, whether that's working with their own clients, or sometimes even just in the general community. So being neurodivergent is not just a workplace issue, it actually flows over into many, many other issues. And for self-employed people, because the boundaries between work and non-work tend to be a little bit more flexible, these challenges do sometimes continue to show up even in a self-employment capacity. So, but what sort of talent is the Canadian labor force currently pushing out? This is the talent that has been pushed out of the labor force in the research study that I did. And I think a lot of us on this call will probably see ourselves here. Regardless of the sector, we have neurodivergent folk who are highly talented. These are all individuals that are running businesses or sole proprietorships, who had to leave or chose to leave due to discrimination, stigma, or a lack of opportunity in the workplace. Now you can imagine the gap. Sorry. When individuals are pushed out of the workplace, the impact on the Canadian economy is substantive. I'm in the middle of doing some research, so I don't have it published yet, but if you're interested with sort of by the end of this year on the actual economic impact and cost of a lack of inclusion of neurodivergence in the economy. But I don't have that data to share yet, but I do just want to share, assure you that it is staggering. And the impact on the Canadian economy for not being able to meaningfully include neurodivergent talent is substantive for employers and the economy, but it's also just as substantive for neurodivergent workers themselves. Most of these individuals who participate in this study would have actually preferred to be working for an employer or at least part-time if that employer was actually supportive and allowed them to do their work. However, that was not the case, so therefore self-employment was the better and or the only option. And these are those push factors. So those repeated negative work experiences, stigma, systemic exclusion. I'm sure people here on this call, I mean, the tales we could tell, right? Being a poor cultural fit, being told we're rude, being not following directions properly, not working in ways that was valued by the employer. Essentially, our neurodivergent traits, the way we prefer to communicate, the way we prefer to socialize, the way we prefer to work are generally not valued and misunderstood. Now you add this in with the genetic component of neurodivergence, which means we likely perhaps have undiagnosed parents that perhaps are needing care. We might have children that are also getting diagnosed who are also neurodivergent. 40% of children with ADHD have at least one parent with ADHD. We see really strong genetic components here. So we actually have family systems, ecosystems impacted by neurodivergence that is stretching across generations, with all of those generations having different support needs and no one necessarily getting it, or that middle sandwich generation being responsible for helping both. So neurodivergent women, particularly in the workforce, we actually see quite a substantive drop off of neurodivergent women around that 45 to 60 mark. Again, I'll have that data to publish to share later this year to show the impact of caregiving responsibilities on workforce participation. So we are a group of individuals who are not given the support that we need, who are then expected to help get the supports for our children if they need them and other people in our lives. Okay. Let's just stop. I know that it sounds like a lot of doom and gloom, and I don't want to doom and gloom us, but I also want to recognize that everyone here on this call who is neurodivergent or supporting neurodivergent people who have been just being their amazing self in the workforce, self-employment, building businesses, doing these things, you've been doing it despite how many struggles, right? We're starting from behind. But that I think is largely because we've just not had opportunities to really talk about being experienced with neurodivergence, navigating workforces, and especially what it's like to be a neurodivergent woman, especially a late identified neurodivergent woman, trying to manage and learn about yourself, avoid burnout, do something useful and meaningful with your work, but also enjoy life. And I feel like that's got to be at least a few of us on this call. Oh, did my slide deck disappear?
It did, yes.
So strange. I mean, I've never had that happen before. It's like the world is telling me to do something different here. Okay. Oh my goodness. Sorry, everyone. I'm gonna just that was very strange. Okay. So, but with all that, what do we want to do with it, right? So if we know all these things and we know all that to be true, what could we actually do to leverage the system and leverage our brains to do something differently, or at least not continue to do the same thing and wonder why it's not working? I used to just wake up every morning and dread work because I'm like, I'm not good at work. So everyone's going to find out I'm not good at work. Something bad's going to happen. And that simply was not the case. It's just repeated negative experiences in the workplace. That's what it does to your brain. It rewires it to think you are actually the problem. You are not the problem. The system is the problem. So let's talk about how we can get around the system, or at least play our own way within the system. So we cannot talk about neurodivergence without talking about executive function challenges. Unfortunately, for our folk, we experience executive function challenges at much higher rates. I guess that is the trade-off for being like having these really great talents. I guess I did not choose this, I just study it. So executive function, this executive function are the skills you need to learn, to live, to show up, to talk, to communicate, to do all your day-to-day tasks. So that's working memory. That's your ability to keep information in your head and use it and remember it and recall it when you need it. That's attention and focus. That's like staying focused on a task and being able to manage distraction. Getting started on something. Anyone have a deadline 4 weeks out? You're like, I'm gonna start it tomorrow, or maybe the next day. And then the day before, you're like, oh, I'm getting this done. And like you nail it and you do a really great job. But to what stress did you lead yourself through to get it done at the very last moment? Organization and planning, keeping everything in the air, especially for self-employed folk, like that is a Herculean task that you're being asked to do. And then my personal Achilles heel, which is self-regulation, which is staying calm when things aren't necessarily going well. So no matter where you are in that list, if you're neurodivergent, you almost certainly are having struggles with some and or all of those. I have struggles with all of them at different times, depending on what's going on. Now, highly self-directed work, like self-employment, can both reduce these, but they also can amplify these challenges too a little bit. And I think that is the really difficult line to manage. So what that can look like is challenges with managing time, priorities, and workload without external structure. So maybe there's no deadlines, and that then becomes difficult or more difficult than having deadlines. Balancing multiple roles, so wearing all of the hats and having to jump in and out of different roles, and then navigating client communications, boundaries, and follow-up. Again, the same communication challenges that we often find in the workplace due to neurotypical preferences, we can also find in self-employment with client communication challenges. But on the bright side about having executive function challenges is that you can actually build and strengthen executive function skills. Like on a day-to-day basis, you actually can work on them and develop them. And that's through a system of through systems, but also through processes and sometimes some interventions as well too. So this is where the sort of challenge, tool support, and outcome process becomes quite helpful. Because the goal is really, as a neurodivergent person, to figure out what are the specific things that are so difficult for you. Sometimes when things are globally difficult, it can just seem like everything's on fire and everything is difficult. But it's important to take some time, sit down and really be like, what are the specific tasks that are different? What is the thing that is actually stopping me or making my job very, very difficult? Once you can isolate that piece, then you could start thinking about what is the tool or support you would need to address that issue. Challenge. I have yet to meet a neurodivergent person that does not have support needs. I know probably a lot of us on this call who are late identified have gone through our whole life with very little supports, and we can do it, or you have done it. And I mean, congratulate yourself for having done that. But also you deserve supports because the interface between neurodivergent and neurotypical, you've been doing all that work to manage that interface, to shore that gap, when really that gap should have been supports to bring you in or to connect you, right? So support needs are not admitting that you're not capable. Support needs are not committing that you're not valuable or you're not talented. Support needs are just recognizing where those challenges are in your brain makeup, the way that you were hardwired. And then if you can pinpoint that, then you can start trialing strategies to address it. Now, what strategy is going to work for you? I don't know, and you don't know necessarily at this specific time, but it is around troubleshooting and working through to figure out what that is. And it tends to be around that difficulty starting and finishing tasks, managing time, focus and attention, organization, and that self-regulation and energy management piece. And I think that's the piece that often does get forgotten because that's often you can't get a software that's going to automate your self-regulation, right? You can get Asana to automate a workflow, but it's not going to automate your self-regulation. And that is where more awareness around your own energy needs, what you need, and setting those boundaries is going to be really essential because we're essentially taught as neurodivergent people to burn out to fit in, and that is not sustainable and will not work. We're also often told to use tools that are developed for neurotypical people. Just like as women, up until the 90s, all medical research was done on men. Every single clinical study was done on men because it was just easier because men are simpler. That was what the medical establishment said. I disagreed. So all of a sudden now, since in the last 30 years, we've actually been doing research on women. Shockingly, men did not teach us about menopause or birth or hormonal challenges, right? So only right now are we actually studying women. The same thing has happened with neurodivergent people in terms of like clinical therapies and interventions. So things that are gold standard for neurotypical people, like cognitive behavioral therapy and talk therapy, and a lot of those modalities are actually contraindicated for neurodivergent people. We actually do need different things because that executive function challenge and vagal nerve differences with vagal nerves. So it's really important to kind of understand when you are trialing interventions and trying to figure out what works. Has this been trialed for neurodivergent people? Is this something that's likely to work for neurodivergent people? If not, just skip it, because if it's designed for neurotypicals, it is very unlikely to work for you. And when we talk about functional challenges, we also have to talk about learning differences, because so many neurodivergent people will have a co-occurring learning challenge. Like for myself, I'm autistic and dyslexic. Which one is more challenging for me? Generally autism, usually the autism, but the dyslexia really shows up in a lot of annoying ways and challenging ways for me too as well. I don't get a lot of great dyslexic skills. Some people do. I seem to have just got a lot of the challenges. But for a lot of people, that means that that legal and financial setup pieces, it is going to be much more difficult. There might actually be reasons why the simple types of tasks that other people say, just do this, just use this, I use this, it works for me. If you're trying things that are not working for you, that other people have said have worked for you, it is likely because it's not addressing an area of functional challenge, and or there might be a learning difference kind of bubbling in below there. So that's where really, instead of beating yourself up and thinking, I should be able to do this, maybe you can't, and that's okay. There are certain things that I can't do. I cannot remember phone numbers. I cannot remember sequences of things. I cannot hold lots of things in my head. That's just not going to work for me. So I know what I need to outsource and what I can do myself. And it's a really powerful place to really be like, these are my talents, these are my skills, this is my profile, this is what I'm going to do. It's okay, I can't do everything. What is going to fill that gap? And we see this too around verbal and written communication challenges. With neurodivergent people, I have no communication challenges. I can speak at my speed, I can bop around, I have lots of ideas, I'm animated, I'm passionate, and those are seen as positive things. Generally, I don't get along with every neurodivergent person, but generally, we do. It's a double empathy challenge. Neurodivergent people can communicate well with neurodivergent people. Neurotypical people can communicate well with neurotypical people. The problem for us is that for the most part, we're generally talking to neurotypical people because it's 80 to 20, right? On average. So this can show up again with our clients, again, or our people who use our services or people you're engaging with in your business model. So this is where really recognizing your preferred communication style. Now, again, this is work and this is your business. So you're not going to, show up as you would to a party, but that also means you do need to show up to work sort of as yourself. But because neurodivergent people are a little bit different, we think differently, we might communicate differently, we might need to actually share that information with the people that we're working at, whether that's our team, whether that's with a client. So that's where really trying to figure out, like, what do I want to set as my sort of normative communication style? How am I going to make sure I'm sharing that with people? And then how am I going to move forward working with clients, service providers, coworkers, colleagues in this way? Now, again, it can sometimes seem as scary to be like, hey, I'm different. Can I have something different? But if we don't do that, then it's like someone's going to be like, that they're different and I don't like what they're doing. This has happened to me in the workplace so many times. People have not understood why I'm doing something some way. And instead of just being like, hey, Jen, could you tell me why? Or, hey, Jen, actually, that's not how we do that here. Could you try doing it differently? What happens? They just ignore me and hope I'm going to change it on my own with absolutely zero feedback or support. That has not worked well for me. That has not been successful. That has led to me not fitting in to several workplaces. So it really has needed for me, and again, the other neurodivergent entrepreneurs that I'm talking to about how they're doing this, self-employment for them is an opportunity to set the communication style for their business and bring people in. And they live over and over in interview. They're like, if a client can't work with my communication style, I know it's not a fit. And I let that client go because I'm not going to fight through communication styles that don't work for me anymore. And I don't have to now that I'm self-employed. So, really thinking about how you want to show up in the world, how you want to run your business, your communication, and running it for you, like you. And if it's designed for a neurodivergent person, it's going to work for neurotypical people as well. It might be different or new. Another way of thinking that would just be around optimizing daily work through personalized tools and systems. Again, these are not an exhaustive list. These are just some of the tools that neurodivergent entrepreneurs shared with me that they found really quite helpful in addressing those functional challenges. All of them were really great. All of the participants are talking about their support need and what they used to get around it. They didn't call it a support need, right? But that's essentially what it is. And it's okay to talk about support needs. I know it seems taboo, but that is just the day-to-day reality of neurodivergent folk. And that's around working around your energy levels. That's around communicating your accessibility needs. That's about aligning business structure. And that's about focusing on sustainability. I think the challenges that the workplaces teach us is that we just have to try our best until we burn out, until we're deemed not a cultural fit, until we're deemed that until we're so devalued in the workplace that we want to leave. But then often we jump into that next venture with that same idea. I'm going to do so much and try so hard and I want it all to work. But we actually really need to focus on sustainability. How could you actually develop a workflow that allowed you to maintain an energy level across a week, a month, a year, 5 years? Because it's different for us. We're not going to be able to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, be on the whole time, and then pack up and go home and leave. That's not going to work for neurodivergent brains. So you have to really figure out what that workflow would look like for you. Even though I'm not self-employed, this has been so valuable for me because I've actually really been able to work with my energy levels instead of more normative ways. Okay, I'm running out of time. I'm going to move quickly. Rejection sensitivity. We are highly rejection sensitive folk generally, especially ADHDers and autistic women. So knowing this is essential. I have a 24-hour hold and wait. If someone says something feedback to me and I freak out inside, I go, don't think about it for 24 hours because otherwise I will say something I will regret or do something I will regret. My ability to manage rejection when I am on fire, essentially from that rejection is very hard. And that's a very normative experience that almost all women neurodivergent entrepreneurs talked about. That idea of just trying to manage rejection and then trying to do something more useful with it. So I think knowing that we are more sensitive to this in general than an average person is very powerful because then we can harness it. We can think about, okay, I might be having a much more severe reaction to this than I might have a day later, 5 days later, a month later, 7 years later after trauma therapy. But I need to know that because otherwise that really helps me know how I'm going to react to something. I think I already touched on energy management burnout, so I might just pop along quickly on that one. And this was the other really big piece that entrepreneurs said over and over again, neurodivergent entrepreneurs, was charging by deliverables instead of time. Because again, a lot of neurotypical people need a 40-hour work week to do their job. Autistic people work at 140% when they're well deployed at something. So you would not need the same amount of time necessarily as a neurotypical, or your time is going to look different. So charging by hours was a strategy that was not working because hours don't compute to work for neurodivergent people for many. So thinking about deliverables and how to actually charge a fair rate for your talent, your brain, your services, as opposed to an hourly rate, which is almost always going to disadvantage you. And I think the last piece I really wanted to pull on was mentorship and community. Just myself as a neurodivergent, late diagnosed person, nothing has been more validating for me than just hearing the stories and experiences of other neurodivergent people and finding your community. So whether that's your sector, whether that's a role, whether that's professional association. I have 2 quotes here from both professionals, one in clinical practice, one sole proprietor, who both said that this was really the game changer for them, finding a community of neurodivergent, self-employed folk who understood, who could work together. And they actually started filling out the gaps. This clinician was like, if I got a client that I didn't think I could work well with, I then had a network of other neurodivergent clinicians to be like, hey, would someone else be able to take this client? Would this be a good fit? So again, and it actually helped with the business, helped with confidence, helped with clients and referrals and marketing and all these things. It's just tricky for us because there aren't a lot of neurodivergent focused mentorship or communities. And again, until more people feel confident putting their hand, until we have more leaders identifying as neurodivergent, it is that peer mentorship will be tricky in building community, but we're getting there. And I see movement on this piece all the time. So, what I just really want to finish on is that when you're really thinking about how work will work for you, think about neuroaffirming strength-based approaches. Don't beat yourself up. You are fabulous and great and brilliant. So, what are the supports you're going to need to get yourself there? Give yourself all the flexibility and pacing and structure and workflows. If you think, oh, that's a weird way to work, or that seems weird, that can't work, but it seems intuitive, just give into it and try working the way that you work. And then really think about those support needs and preferences because you will work better in an environment that works best for you. I also have a lot of actionable insights for the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I'm not going to go into them, but if you're interested, I can absolutely send you more information about how the ecosystem needs to change. This is not just individuals, this is a systemic problem, but we don't have time. And these are the resources that Heather, I think some of them will send out. There's also a full research report and an interactive map of resources and supports for neurodivergent self-employed people, especially those on the beginning of their journey mapped across Canada if people are interested. These are all freely accessible via Signal49. Whew. Thanks, Heather. I'm gonna pause there and maybe we'll see if there's questions or Q&A.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Fane. That was a really rich and grounding presentation, and it was clear that it was really connecting with the group that we have here today. So thank you so much. We do have a few questions, so we'll take some of those that we've gotten through the chat, and then once we get through those, if there's anyone that wants to kind of come off mute and ask your questions directly to Jennifer, that would be great. So one of the first questions is about what you had on slide 3. So it shows the percentages of the identities surveyed, and it said that 8.8% identified as autistic and ASD. So they're asking, what does that mean exactly? As to me, that they're the same diagnosis. So is it just a language difference, or are they actually different diagnoses?
Thank you, Heather. I know I've thrown a lot of acronyms. So the formal diagnostic criteria in the DSM-5 is autism spectrum disorder, which is shortened to ASD. Many autistic people do not like the wording disorder and see it being autistic as an identity versus actually a problem or disorder. So a lot of people will just go with like, I have autism, I am autistic, I am an autist. There's lots of different language here. I think there is good research on this. Generally, autistic adults prefer to be called autistic versus that person first language as having autism, but that is not universal, and often people have very strong opinions about it. So it is with anything, it's generally best to use with people's identity labels. So if someone is saying they have autism, I would use that word. If someone is using I am autistic, I would use that word with them, but they are the same. And also some autistic people self-identify, so therefore they would not have an ASD diagnosis, they would self-identify as autistic. Great question.
Thank you for the clarification there. Appreciate that. So one of the other questions that was coming up throughout the chats was asking if there's any race-based data in your research. So they were wondering how many neurodivergents also experience potential racism on top of being neurodivergent, and that this person in particular knows that Canada has a habit of not collecting race-based data, so the intersectionality is never fully seen in the data.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's such a great question. I didn't collect that level of data on this group because it was qualitative in nature. It's very conversational. We did focus groups, but I did the year before, 2023, I did a national sample of post-secondary neurodivergent students that included a 400 person student survey, and I did collect that demographic data for that group. They're mostly school leavers, 18 to 24, but it's a good population-based mini sample. And 62% of them had intersectional identities. So they may have identified as Indigenous Canadian, a newcomer, refugee, a person of color, and or as having a disability. So I am very interested in those intersectional identities, especially even the intersection between having a disability and being neurodivergent. For some people, that is there's significant overlap, but that is not always the same. Whether a neurodivergent person would identify as being disabled would likely depend on themselves and the level of impact that their neurodivergence has on their life. But yes, the intersectionalities absolutely do matter. If we think about Indigenous Canadians too, as well, we see an overrepresentation of, say, learning disabilities and other neurodevelopmental disadvantage due to systemic disadvantage as well too. So we certainly can't look at neurodivergence on its own, but how it is impacting different communities absolutely does show up. There's also been really good research on the experience of Black autistics as well, and how autism is often either if someone has a higher support needs, that their experience is quite different versus a lower support needs, specifically within that population. So I honestly could talk about neurodivergence for about 8 hours straight. It is my current special interest, in case anyone was wondering. And in the 45 minutes I had was just not enough time to go through all of that. But if anyone's interested in those specific, in some of the data or other pieces, please get in contact with me because I do have it. And also watch Signal49 because there's going to be some exciting data coming out by the end of the year as well in this area too.
Perfect. We look forward to reading through that when the additional research comes out. So some other questions were, can you provide some examples of different communication styles?
Yes, absolutely. So, neurodivergent people, especially if we're talking about autistic communication preferences, an ADHD communication preferences, we often see that neurodivergent people are more direct. That can be often, though, interpreted as blunt or rude. But really being direct is actually just really the intent is generally to be very clear. But that is where a lot of neurodivergent people, that interface becomes really problematic because how you say something, often in the workplace or in society, is more important than what you're saying, which to a neurodivergent person often doesn't really make sense because like we're just trying to be clear and we want to be understood. So that can often show up in I'm going to actually share an example because I think it's quite helpful to illustrate it. So my background is from as a professor. So I used to do a lot of writing and I used to do a lot of peer-reviewed writing. So I would write and then I would send it off peer review and then strangers who I didn't know, who are completely anonymous, would review my work and I would make revisions. Now, I wasn't that bothered by that because they're just random people who I don't know, and reviewer two is always a jerk. And I'm like, whatever, I'm going to move on and just push through and get my stuff published. I now work in a team of writing, and I have to write as a team. And I'm used to defending my writing because that's what happens in peer review. Someone says, you should do this. And you either have to say, yes, I will do this, or no, I will not do this because of this reason. So that's what I kept doing in my workplace. Every time someone gave me feedback, I would be like, I'm not going to do this because da 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 da. Because I'm like, well, that's what you do. Like, I'm going to defend this. And it kept kind of being a problem. Or it was a challenge because the feedback cycles were not going well with me. And there was all this challenge. So my director of research impact, who is a cis white man in his 50s, who often is like sometimes a challenge for neurodivergent people, right? People who are privileged and carry a lot of privilege in the workplace. He started the meeting by going, Jen, just want to remind you that this feedback session, you don't need to defend yourself. You just need to listen to my ideas. And it's your choice whether you're going to take them up on them or not. And I was like, oh, he's never said that before. I've been coming into this meeting ready to defend myself and clearly communicate and justify my position. And all I had to do was listen. It really changed because I'm like, oh, I can decide what I want to do. But that my idea of what communication was and what I need to say and what I wanted to do was really different than the team environment or the ethos and what other people were thinking. And I've been in the workplace for 20 years. I've been doing my job for 20 years now, and I'm still realizing how many times I'm missing the memo on how I'm supposed to communicate with my team and at work. So I think this is where knowing your own communication style and then being able to be a bit of a buffer when communicating with people, be like what I need, how I work best. And then when you do that, so I'm like, I need this in writing. I want to like sit and think about this feedback before I respond. I want to meet face to face so I can like actually see you so my tone's not misread in email. And then when you start telling people what you need, people, for in my example, here's like, oh, Jen communicates differently. So maybe I should communicate differently with Jen to help her. And that's where that magic happens, right? So that self-advocacy of me saying, I'm neurodivergent, I have trouble with feedback, I find this process difficult. And then the want for someone to be like, okay, Jen finds this difficult. I'm going to remind Jen of what this is so she's not running into communication challenges. So I know it's a specific example to my work, but I think it really highlights how much of communication challenges are just go unspoken and not understood, and how much when you're self-employed you actually have so much ability to decide how you want to communicate, to set the tone. And as a lot of neurodivergent entrepreneurs told me, they're like, if a client can't work with me in the way that I work, that's okay. I let that one go because that is not going to be gratifying. I'm not going to do the work and it's going to end up in a nightmare that's actually going to end up costing me money versus this actually being business. So whether you're in a workplace or in self-employment, knowing how you communicate and telling that person how to shore the gap, it gets us ahead. It's not, sometimes it fails miserably. I can give you examples of it failing miserably as well, but it does work, and it is working, and the increased awareness is working for our group of people.
Thank you so much. We've got a lot of really great questions here and not so much time left, so I'm going to try to get through as many more as we can. There's one that mentioned that the differences in Nagel verb or Nagel Bagel, no,
Bagel.
and ND people. Do you have any resources that you could share or research that point us in the direction to better understand that?
Yeah, I will say full stop that this is not my area of research specifically, but yes, I absolutely do have it. It is a newer area of research, and I think where a lot of neurodivergent folk get let down is that a lot of the medical professionals that we might be working with might not know emerging research in this area and contraindications for neurodivergent folk. So yes, if someone wants to follow, or Heather, I can connect with you and send a few like starting points by. But again, it's probably going to be a lot of trial and error. But for neurodivergent folk, like those communication challenges, like the talk therapy, CBT, a lot of those other modalities does not work. So, but there are a whole suite of interventions and therapies and supports for neurodivergent folk. I think a lot of people don't know about them. So I'll send a few things to get started, but then it is kind of that trial and error of like figuring out what will work.
Perfect. We'll be happy to share those with our kind of wrap up email that goes out to everyone after this. So another one is, are there any insights on long-term self-employed people looking to find employment and what to bring to that organization in terms of talents and be ready to position
Hmm.
accommodations in a positive way?
That's a really lovely question. Thank you. I will say with the sample of that 75 neurodivergent entrepreneurs, about a third actually still had some form of more traditional employment. So they might have had like part-time work through an organization. They might have been doing some contracting, or they as well might have just cyclical work. Like some of them were working with like grants or certain government organizations and things like that. So I would say, and that was actually seen as quite desirable by the participants to just like diversify income streams. So I think for a lot of neurodivergent folk moving in between employment, self-employment, and different types of roles, like we have nonlinear careers. Like who here in this call is on their fourth or fifth career? I'm on my fourth. There's got to be a Elizabeth. I see Elizabeth there. I'm like, yes, we have so many great conversations about this. So we have nonlinear careers and we do our best and we meet a barrier and then we're like, okay, well, I'm going to go here. And then we meet a barrier and I'm going to go here. But I think that one, we could try and hide that on our resumes and on LinkedIn to be like, no, it's more traditional, like I have the skills. Or you could really think about how would I actually tell this story, my narrative, in a compelling way that draws on these strengths and what I've been able to accomplish, as opposed to like why I've had to jump back and forth between things. So I think that's actually a marketing challenge of neurodivergent people. I think we're often not we're often underselling ourselves and being like, oh, well, I had to start again, or yep, I've had to move, or yeah, I'm in a new job again, or trying something new. When really it's actually a story of our persistence and our ability to continue through challenges and get things done, no matter though no one else has helped us often, or we've had all those barriers. So I think whether self-employment is something that you're planning to or wanting to sustain permanently, or something you're going to try for a bit, or that map in with other types of income streams, I think really work on your story. Like what are your skills? What are your strengths? And then where's the pull through in all your experiences where all of that builds? Because if I think of my job as a teacher, as a professor, as a director at a not-for-profit, and a researcher, you could be like, well, that's a mess of a career. Like, what the heck? This woman's doing a different thing every 5 minutes. Sure. Or you could be like, this is an individual with a wide range of skills across a wide range of sectors who is passionate about, inclusion and accessibility, and here's what I can do, and here's how I did it. That's actually an entirely different story. So I think here I would just encourage you to like work on your pull through story. Like you are your best marketer, but I think often we're so that internalized ableism and shame around when an employment didn't work out. Like if anyone on this call is still battling like PTSD from a terrible employer, I know there's got to be a few of you on this call. Often those are the stories that stick with us. Those are the narratives that frame our work, and they shouldn't be. Those were the mistakes. Those were something you did that was like, oh, I should not have done that. I've learned from that. Or like, oh, I can see why that ended so terribly. But like, where are the triumphs? Pull through the triumphs and just leave the negative experiences behind.
I think that's some really powerful advice, and it's very clear from the chat. Like all of this is resonating so well with the really great group that we've had here. There's been so many people sharing different resources with each other, connecting, understanding that they're not alone in their experiences. So I think this has been an absolutely incredible hour that's already up, unfortunately. I wish we had hours and hours and hours of time with you, Jen. So I just want to say thank you so much to you and to everyone for being here today, and your vulnerability and your connections that you've made today. And I think it's really, really impactful. So one thing I'll just say is, again, this is all recorded. We will send this out. We've got the links to all of the research that you can look at. I know that there was a question about going back to one of the slides about the apps that are helpful. That'll be all in the recording. So that will be available. So one of the quick things I just kind of wanted to say before we wrapped up, that we will be opening registration soon for another StrikeUP Connects webinar in August. So that's with Export Development Canada and FIT, so the Forum for International Trade Training. They're going to be doing a presentation on exporting 101. So the very starts of like, are you thinking about global expansion? What are the first things that you have to start thinking about in your early stages of wanting to expand beyond Canada? So that information will come out shortly. And secondly, we are thrilled to kind of soft launch an announcement, and that we will be evolving our event programming for StrikeUP. So we will be introducing what we're calling our StrikeUP Signature Series, which will start in September this year. So moving away from our big conference into what we're calling these kind of mini conferences that will happen throughout the year. So more information will come out about that, but we're very excited about it, and we'll be sharing more details. So keep a close watch on your email boxes if you're on our newsletter or our socials. So we're very excited about that. So thank you again, Jen. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing with us. And thank you everyone for being here, spending the time with us today. So take care of yourselves, and hopefully we'll see you at the next StrikeUP Connects event.
Thanks
Bye,
again,
everybody.
everyone.